The snow fell heavy that December evening in Cedar Falls, coating the old county road in a thick white blanket that muffled all sound. Howard and Dorothy Miller had lived in their small farmhouse at the edge of town for 43 years, and they knew these winter nights well. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you grateful for a warm fire and a cup of coffee. Howard was 71 that winter, with silver hair and hands that still remembered every fence post he'd mended on their property. Dorothy was 68 with eyes that crinkled at the corners from a lifetime of smiling even when times were hard. They'd raised 3 children in that house, and now it was just the two of them listening to the wind howl against the windows. Dorothy was folding laundry in the living room when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the winter night. She paused, holding one of Howard's flannel shirts against her chest, and listened. "Howard," she called toward the kitchen where he was washing their dinner dishes. "Do you hear that?" He dried his hands on a towel and came to stand beside her. They both heard it then. The struggling whine of a motorcycle engine sputtering and dying somewhere out on the road. Howard moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. Through the swirling snow he could barely make out a figure hunched over a motorcycle about 100 yards down from their driveway. The person seemed to be trying to restart the engine, but even from that distance Howard could see the way the figure's shoulders shook from the cold. "Someone's in trouble out there," Howard said quietly. Dorothy was already moving toward the coat closet. "Well, we can't leave them out in this weather," she said in that matter-of-fact way she'd always had about doing what was right. Howard pulled on his heavy winter coat and boots while Dorothy wrapped a scarf around her neck. They'd been married long enough that they didn't need to discuss it. Some things you just did because that's what decent people do for one another. The cold hit them like a wall when they stepped outside. Howard carried a flashlight and Dorothy had grabbed an extra blanket from the hall closet. They made their way carefully down the snowy driveway, calling out so they wouldn't startle the stranger. As they got closer, Howard's flashlight beam revealed a young man, maybe 30 years old, covered in tattoos that ran up both arms and disappeared under his vest. He wore a leather jacket with a Hell's Angels patch on the back, and his blonde hair was wet from the melting snow. His lips had a blue tinge that worried Dorothy immediately. The young man looked up at them with eyes that seemed surprised that anyone would come out in weather like this. His whole body was shaking so hard he could barely speak. "I'm so sorry," he managed through chattering teeth. "Bike just died on me. I was trying to make it to Millbrook before the storm got worse." "You're not making it anywhere tonight, son," Howard said gently. "That's 20 miles from here and you'll freeze solid before you get halfway. Come on up to the house." The young man hesitated. Dorothy could see the uncertainty in his face. Maybe he was used to people crossing the street when they saw him coming. Maybe he'd learned to expect judgment based on how he looked. But the cold was making the decision for him. "Name's Jake," he said as they helped him leave the motorcycle and start walking toward the warm lights of the farmhouse. "I'm Howard and this is my wife Dorothy," Howard said, supporting Jake's arm as the younger man stumbled through the deep snow. "Let's get you warmed up before we worry about anything else." Inside the house, Dorothy immediately went into action the way she had when her own children came home cold and wet from playing in the snow. She sat Jake down near the fireplace and brought him dry clothes that had belonged to their son Michael. Howard made coffee while Dorothy wrapped Jake in blankets. For the first hour Jake mostly just shivered and sipped the hot coffee gratefully. Dorothy made him soup without asking if he wanted any. She just set it in front of him with a spoon and a napkin and told him to eat up. Something about her gentle firmness reminded Jake of his own grandmother who'd passed away 5 years ago. The last person who'd really cared whether he ate or stayed warm or made it home safe. As the warmth returned to Jake's body, the three of them began to talk. Howard asked about the motorcycle and Jake's face lit up as he described the vintage bike he'd been restoring for 2 years. Dorothy asked where he was headed and Jake explained he'd been visiting his sister in Oakmont, trying to reconnect after some difficult years. "I made some mistakes when I was younger," Jake said quietly, staring into his coffee cup. "Ran with the wrong crowd. Did some time. I'm trying to do better now, but people see the tattoos and the vest and they've already made up their minds about who I am." Dorothy reached over and patted his hand. "Well, we're not most people, dear," she said simply. "We see a young man who got caught in a snowstorm and needed help. Same as we'd see anyone else." Jake's eyes got bright and he looked away quickly. It had been a long time since anyone had looked past his appearance to see the person underneath. They talked late into the night. Jake told them about his job as a mechanic and his dream of opening his own shop someday. Howard shared stories about farming and the land and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Dorothy brought out photo albums and showed Jake pictures of their children and grandchildren laughing at the old hairstyles and clothes. "You have a beautiful family," Jake said softly, looking at a picture of all three Miller children together at Christmas. "You're part of every family you break bread with," Dorothy said. "That's what my mother used to tell me, and I believe it's true." They set Jake up in their son's old room with clean sheets and extra blankets. As Howard showed him where the bathroom was and made sure he had everything he needed, Jake kept thanking them. "You folks didn't have to do any of this," he said. "Most people wouldn't have. Most people are better than you think," Howard said. "You just have to give them the chance to be. Sleep well, son." The next morning the snow had stopped and the sun was shining bright on a world transformed into white crystal. Howard helped Jake dig out the motorcycle and they discovered the problem was a frozen fuel line and a dead battery. Jake called a tow truck from town, and while they waited, Dorothy made a huge breakfast of eggs and bacon and pancakes. When the tow truck finally arrived, Jake hugged them both. He pulled a card from his wallet with his phone number and the address of the garage where he worked. "I mean it," he said seriously. "If you ever need anything, you call me. Day or night. I won't forget what you did for me." Dorothy kissed his cheek and Howard shook his hand and they waved as he rode away in the tow truck. Then they went back inside to their quiet house and their simple life, thinking they'd probably never see him again, but glad they'd helped anyway. 3 weeks passed. The holidays came and went. Howard and Dorothy celebrated New Year's Eve in their living room, watching the ball drop on television and going to bed at 10:30 like they always did. It was a Tuesday morning when Dorothy noticed the smell. She was making breakfast and something seemed off. She mentioned it to Howard, who sniffed the air and frowned. "Might be the furnace," he said. "I'll check it after breakfast." But before he could finish his eggs, Dorothy suddenly felt dizzy. She sat down hard in her chair and looked at Howard with confused eyes. "I don't feel well," she said, and her voice sounded strange and far away. Howard stood up to go to her, but his legs wouldn't work right. The room seemed to tilt and he grabbed the table to steady himself. Something was very wrong. That's when they heard the front door crash open. Jake burst into the kitchen, his eyes wild and urgent. He ran straight to the windows, throwing them open, and then to Howard and Dorothy. "Carbon monoxide," he shouted, helping Howard to his feet and supporting Dorothy with his other arm. "Get outside now." He half carried them both out onto the front porch into the cold January air. Dorothy was barely conscious and Howard's skin had a strange cherry red color. Jake had his phone out, calling 911 even as he kept talking to them, telling them to breathe deeply to stay with him. "I just had this feeling," Jake said later after the ambulance had taken Howard and Dorothy to the hospital and they'd been treated with oxygen. "I couldn't stop thinking about you folks. Something told me to drive out here this morning. I was almost to your driveway when I remembered what you said about your furnace being old. I just knew something was wrong." The fire department found a cracked heat exchanger in their furnace, leaking deadly carbon monoxide into their home. Another 30 minutes and Howard and Dorothy would have died in their sleep that night. Jake stayed at the hospital until the doctors said they were going to be fine. He held Dorothy's hand while she cried and thanked him. He helped Howard arrange for a new furnace to be installed, talking the company into giving them a discount. "You saved our lives," Howard said, gripping Jake's shoulder. "No," Jake said quietly. "You saved mine first. You saw me as a person worth helping when I was nobody to you. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost. The belief that good people still exist in this world. I was just paying it forward." Dorothy smiled through her tears. "I think we saved each other, dear," she said. And in that hospital room with winter light streaming through the windows, 3 people who'd started as strangers became family in the way that matters most. Not through blood but through kindness. Not through obligation but through love freely given and returned. Jake became a regular visitor to the farmhouse after that. He fixed things around their property and brought his sister to meet them and eventually his girlfriend, who Dorothy immediately adored. When Jake finally opened his own garage 2 years later, Howard and Dorothy were there for the ribbon-cutting, standing proud as any parents. And on cold winter nights when the snow falls heavy, Dorothy still makes extra coffee just in case someone needs help. Because she and Howard learned what they'd always suspected. That the best things in life come from opening your door and your heart to whoever needs it, regardless of how they look or where they come from. Kindness has a way of coming back around when you least expect it and most need it. That's not just sentiment. That's truth as real as the warmth of a fire on a winter night or the comfort of knowing you're not alone in this world.